So I'm assuming that everybody who is here is concerned about things like climate change and our future. So we're not going to be talking about the doomsday too much. What I want to do is just plunge in and begin to introduce, as I advertised, some new ideas. So um, with your permission, I'll do that. I expect we'll pause at various points and have some open conversation. We'll see how we go. These things are always improvised. So the context is that climate change is real, and there are people really concerned about that. They do what I call raising the alarm. But it's more than just climate change. These are indicative. So a bunch of other life support systems that are not doing too well. I really like this cartoon. To me, it sums up a lot of how our industrial economic system currently works. So the first paradigm, as I call it, or way of thinking, is this one. Um, a lot of people faced with such a big challenging problem, they will focus on pieces of the puzzle. In terms of climate action, here in Australia, a lot of people work on stopping Adani, the big coal mine. We're now dealing with fracking in the Northern Territory. Other people focus on 100% renewable energy. All of these responses are absolutely pertinent to our challenge, but they focus on pieces of the puzzle. So what I mean by moving to system thinking is seeing larger patterns of connection. And here's one way to get at it. I devised a tool called kitchen table conversations. And it's meant to be a tool on a conversation about what makes CO2 emissions go up. And as a proxy for that, we can point out that the more stuff, the more CO2 emissions, because it's connected to industry. So I ask, and I won't take you all through it, this is just kind of show and tell, just to give you a sense of it. I ask people, well, what makes stuff go up? And somebody would say something like advertising. I'll bring in the trade agreements. People nod their heads when I say corporate control of governments. And as we all know, this whole system feeds the top 0.1% or whatever, whose forebears set the system up however long back we want to go. Economic growth is part of it, population growth is part of it. So that's a tool for moving people's thinking from thinking about just pieces of the puzzle to seeing how the whole larger system works. Another tool that does the same thing is some of them may know Kate Raworth's donut economics diagram. It's really terrific because it talks about limits in terms of the environment on one hand, and then social limits on the other in terms of well-being. Any quick comments about that? Just to have a little pause here. What do you think of this idea of expanding people's thinking from thinking to the level of seeing a system? Open comments, no particular order.
Okay, I'll jump in, Andrew. I'm Stephen Taylor in London. Hi. I very much like and appreciate your systemic picture of what's going on. And I've come to think that it omits a really key aspect. And
Okay.
that aspect is the privileged position that those of us around the table, those of us in Western society, those of us who have more than anyone else in the planet an influence on how these things go, enjoy in this society. A writer in the Guardian newspaper in England yesterday noted that concern about the ecological catastrophe is broad but shallow. And that fits my own observations. What I see is certainly amongst the people I talk to, that support for action on climate change, the environment, and so forth is quite consistent, right up to the point at which one's own privileges are challenged. And then it's the concern switches almost immediately to, oh, I need to do this, so forth. And it seems to me that we need to present a systematic picture of our part in this, that we're the website,
Wait a
the
minute,
story of stuff.
Stephen.
Yeah.
Just take it to this point.
Mm.
The conversation is apt. We are privileged, so we're just the right people to be on this call. And some privileged folks, maybe most, have some concern about the consequences of doing something like slowing the economy. I think how to handle that is a tactical question, not a design question. And later we'll talk about conversations and stuff. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Okay. A bit of background about myself. I won't give all my background, but a piece that's relevant here is I had the privilege and paid the money to train with Moshe Feldenkrais. So Feldenkrais had a theory about how to improve brain functioning. And we demonstrate that the theory is useful by working with kids with cerebral palsy or people recovering from strokes. We help them move better. But the theory can be generalized to any skilled behavior. And part of it is changing people's maps. So let's have a look. So this diagram that I just showed is one approach to changing people's maps in terms of social change, what we have to deal with. Let's drop into a bit of neurology here. You've all seen kids pull themselves up on something, teeter a little bit, and fall down. What's happening? They are working out how to coordinate their vestibular apparatus in the inner ear with the sensations of their legs, therefore their muscles. And when they, through trial and error, get it, yay, I can stand, and later I can walk, all of that. So what we're looking at is, in this elementary thing, the person is developing patterns of neurological coordination that enable them to do whatever skilled activity we're working on. Famous neurologist Wilder Penfield, when he was doing brain surgery, he took the opportunity to give little tiny electrode probes, tiny charges, to different parts of people's brain to see how they would respond. This was totally safe and ethical. And what he found was that there are regions of brain cells devoted to different parts of the body. So the part of the brain devoted to the mouth gets a lot of brain cells, likewise with the thumb and the fingers, less so for the knee, for example. So we found these maps on the brain. There's more than one, but they have this kind of structure. And from these maps, then we get movement. The brain controls playing tennis, playing the violin, and finally how we run a business. At some level, it's all the same thing about the neurology of it. So the approach that I'm championing for social change is not primarily about messages, though they have a place, but can we devise ways to help people think better? And the answer is yes, we can. I just showed you one. That's the approach. Now, the current situation, there are actually more than 1 million groups that care about environmental well-being and social well-being. Each of them does their own thing. Sometimes they compete for attention and even for resources. So the public hears a cacophony of voices as part of the current situation. Sorry, I seem to have got my slides out of order. Oh, I did. Okay, next element. So people's behavior is based on their mental maps. It's also based on their intention. Boy, my apologies for how this seemed to have jumped around. I didn't know what happened. Okay, so we can describe this situation as a wicked problem. Many elements, many layers, many different levels of consciousness, many different agendas. How do we orient ourselves with such a complex problem? It helps to have a goal to work towards. So one way to phrase such a goal is, our goal is to transition to a life-affirming culture. And my thought with this is that's up down here, boy. That's a goal that encompasses the aspiration of many of the environmental progressive groups. So a little pause, and what do you make of this goal as something for us collectively to work towards and as a unifying umbrella for the environmental progressive movement and faith communities? Comments, reactions?
How will you present your new paradigm as different from yet another participant in the cacophony of causes?
Before I go to that, could I have a response just to the idea of a life-affirming culture as a goal for us to collectively work towards? What do you think? Frenzy? We've talked before.
Sorry, I didn't catch the answer.
I'm putting the question to you again. Before I answer your question, what do you think of a life-affirming culture as an overarching goal?
It's a nice set of words, but there are lots of nice sets of words.
I'll rephrase the question, Franzi, because I don't want to debate it. As a nice set of words, does it do the job? Is it a valid expression of an overarching goal for our time?
It is too general.
Okay, now let me answer your question. And this is a conversation that even though Franzi and I are doing it, this is part of all of our conversation.
Yeah.
It is general on purpose. The cacophony of voices are all specific, or most of them. I should qualify most because there are some great thinkers who talk about whole system change. So we have Paul Raskin, Tellus Institute, the great tradition. Their great tradition. We have David Corton, brilliant thinkers. What they don't have is a means of reaching the general public. Conversely, there are lots of groups. There are a few really big groups, Avas, Get Up, Move On, that work on the pieces of the puzzle, issues of the day, they also don't have the means of reaching the general public, although the large groups have more members than the small groups. So the vision I'm getting to here is their members could champion one goal, a life-affirming culture, as an advertising first step, and then use kitchen table conversations so that people come to grips with the systemic changes we need, in which you personally are a master of, Franzi, to actually evolve a society that works. So that's my thought, but other views about what's involved, this phrase, a life-affirming culture. Does that cover some ground or not? Long silence.
I don't think cultures are the sorts of...
Sorry. I want somebody else to talk, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Most people have their mic muted.
Andrew.
Yeah, Graham, hi.
Hi, Andrew. Yes, a life-affirming culture, I don't think the meaning of it is clear from just those three words.
It's not. I'm agreed on that. It's not.
Not to me. I don't know. I can guess, I can have thoughts, but it's not. It doesn't give me a solution.
No, so it has to be unpacked. But you and I had a conversation today. Yay. So what I mean by
Yes.
life-affirming culture is all those things you were talking about, and which many other people are talking about. So a steady state economy, living within planetary limits, taking care of people. I'd add in things like better childrearing for kids, things like that. All of these come into a culture that takes care of people within planetary boundaries. Okay, let me try and go on, even though something's really weird about my slide deck. Oh, here we go. So indicatively, here was some of the things I was thinking of as what a life-affirming culture refers to. And if we unpack it, there's even more. So we have another way of an indicative list. We could also throw in many, though not all, of the Sustainable Development Goals, for example. So there's lots of pieces of the puzzle. The point of the phrase is to find a way to bring them under one umbrella so that we have a way to talk about that is different than the current mainstream agenda of economic growth. Okay, so assuming the goal is accepted, then the question becomes, how do we collectively seed that into mainstream thinking? And my thought was to invite the members of the millions of groups that care, and there are literally millions, as many as possible, to act as what I call citizen educators. And the most direct way to do that is to invite somebody to have coffee and say, would you be willing to spend an hour with me going through a deeper conversation about what's our current situation and what's the system that drives it that makes things worse. A little pause. What do you think of that idea, folks?
Hi, Andrew. It's Peter here.
Hello, Peter.
Hey, how are you? We've spoken before.
Yeah.
I think this has got a lot of merit. You know, the kitchen table, the communication, and working at community, at individual, family, you know, tribes, community level, bringing change up from below. So initiating change and bringing groups of people together in communities and yeah, initiating change that way. But my concern, it's not a concern, it's a reflection, is can we do it? Can we bring in, you know, whatever that tipping point? Let's say there's 7 billion people on the planet. Let's say 2 billion of them are, you know, reasonably affluent in developed nations, you know, have the resources, the communication, the privilege, as was spoken about before. So let's say there's 2 billion people who have the privilege and connectivity through internet, etc., and have the luxury of time and, in fact, a kitchen table to sit around. How do we scale that from this discussion here tonight to engaging a critical mass within that 2 billion people to create the change necessary in the time available? And in the time available, I'm talking about this decade, 10 years from today.
Yeah, let me
10
respond
years
to
from-
that. That's a very clear question.
Okay.
My own view is we'll probably fail. It's probably impossible to reach enough people fast enough to avoid the total collapse. That said, I haven't given up. So, yes, we're just a tiny group. The platform to support this is called Inspiring Transition. It's a tiny group, but I will tell you the model for scaling it. Some of you may know of an online group called Mind Valley. They have several million members, I think. They run personal development courses that people pay for. The head of it, Vishen, is charismatic, very bright, and a really open kind of person with really positive values. I think he has more to him than just making money, though he's really interested in making lots of money. So last week, I sent a proposal to him saying the kinds of things I'm talking about here, specifically suggesting that Mind Valley members who now are students could potentially become leaders in their own right. And again, talk about this stuff with their friends. And if a few groups like that get on, and if some of the larger thought leaders get on, let's imagine George Monbiot, we shift the language deeper than that. We begin to get people into systems thinking. People get more aware of the reality of the implications of climate change. Oh, that's actually coming. Then we have the possibility of sparking a movement that's actually going to make a difference that counts. That's my vision, and that's what I'm working on. Other comments?
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's answered that question. But it's I'm an engineer. I'm a whole lot less focused on the soft approach, and you know, recognize that as a weakness. So that's my failing, is the soft approach, you know, the human, the social approach that you're taking. My approach is very much a create incentive for change, whether that's incentive as the consumer, the individual, the community, the business. My approach is to say we actually have to have a demonstrable incentive. It might be financial, it might be social, it might be environmental, whatever that is, but that needs to be the trigger to get people to the table, inverted commas. Your table is the kitchen table, my table is the commercial table. But I guess my approach is to say, you have to bend this thing. You have to bend this challenge we've got, which is,
Okay,
of course,
Peter, let me
warming, resources.
respond to that, please. So we're
Yep.
talking about different theories of change, I think. And if I hear you right, you're saying you envision offering people really concrete, positive things they can respond to, work on, adapt, even use in their business. Something like that?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The outcome, I
Let me
believe,
talk a bit
the
more, Peter. I
outcome.
just wanted to check that. I want to,
Yeah, I believe the outcomes we're trying to achieve is the same, and there are different pathways to achieve those outcomes.
right. Now I'll say something that is direct and you probably won't like it. Everybody working with that approach, and it's been going on for quite a long time, versions of it, collectively that approach is failing. The environmental businesses aren't changing the culture because all the statistics are getting worse. The NGOs aren't changing the culture. Some kind of change is going on. Greta Thunberg, her prominence is affecting people's consciousness. But I'm thinking that in terms of the paradigm I'm talking about, Peter, while we can celebrate and we actually want to have much more of this practical stuff you're talking about, that practical stuff is not an inducement, for example, to slow the economy. Yet, arguably, if we don't slow the economy, then we'll continue to grind up resources the way the cartoon showed. So in my world, it's best a yes and I can acknowledge that you might just want to prefer with your more concrete, direct approach. But I'm suggesting that collectively we would do well to put some energy into communicating about the systemics change and actually working on the soft mindset stuff, not just the practical.
Yep, I get that, and I understand, and I hear you, and I respect that. Yeah,
Okay.
we've been trying
Let's
to
hear
do this
somebody
for
else's
years.
view then, Peter. Somebody else want to come into the conversation, please?
Andrew, I'd like to come into the conversation. I've been part of the environmental movement for quite a lot of years. And a few years ago, I'm in Geelong, they went through a 30-year planning program. And it was quite what they wanted to do. They wanted to have at least 10% of the population have an input on what they wanted for the future. One of the things that came up time and time again, the language was too complicated. The whole trying to understand it was too complicated. And so therefore they turned off. Until I had a conversation and put it back down to basics, said, if you're looking at world global sustainability, look at your own life. How are you sustainable within your own life? Bring it back to the individual and then brought it out to the community, but just the simple language. And that's one of the things that, whilst I can speak the language, I've found that the simpler that you make it, it then becomes, people understand it more. And that's one of the things that I find. I understand the concept of what you're trying to get through. I've been part of the various groups and things, and I've said, we're preaching to the converted, the people that are already on that journey, and trying to get to the business groups beyond that. Now, whilst the business groups might understand some of this language, it is still, it's what I find too complicated. We need to keep it simple, that whole KISS principle. I suppose what's happened at the moment, it's kept it simple,
I'll get two takes on that if I could.
Yeah.
Let me go back and just share a screen to do it. It'll take me just a moment. Okay, so I developed a tool called Looming Disasters. Again, it's a tool for a conversation. And it's just loose leaf images printed on A4, not even bound, not a book. You can show the images, just a moment, one at a time. People know some of it they don't. Most people, for example, would know this one or something like it. The point of the images is just emotional. It's to bring home to people these things are going on, they're real, they will have real world consequences for us, they already do. So that tool is called Looming Disasters. And all of it, or most of it, is, if you take a minute with it, it's pretty straightforward. You can show this diagram of humans and their animals and how much of the biosphere we take over, and people get it. So that's one. It follows to a degree the keep it simple principle, provided it's not just a sound bite, but actually a thoughtful conversation. Now, that noted, let's go back to this one. So every element of this, well, the diagram as a diagram looks a little complicated, and the full one has even got a few more elements. Each element of this is readily understandable. People know what stuff is. It's what we buy in the shops. People get factories, they get CO2, they get advertising. They won't get necessarily trade agreements, but so it goes. They will get the connection to economic growth, perhaps, but they won't like it necessarily. So part of the first conversation is people simply get introduced to the idea, whether they like it or not. This is how it connects up. Like with the population, which some people tell me is a really unpopular conversation. So, my view, to be direct with you, Petra, is those personal bring it home conversations will not scale up to whole system change, challenging the economic system, challenging the power structures. They're part of it, but they don't scale up. Now, a feature of our conversation, which I like, is we're challenging each other in goodwill. That itself is a sign of emotional maturity, and the ability to do that is part of the evolution of a life-affirming culture.
However, Andrew, I'll say a lot of it. Whilst I'm prepared to have a conversation and I enjoy constructive debate, as they say, a lot of people don't. And that's, I find the other way, it actually becomes quite threatening to some people if you have that constructive debate. So I found sometimes just by keeping it really simple and not doing the debate or not trying to have that stronger conversation, or however, I may not be framing it right, most people will nod and say yes. And when I've had a conversation with them after, they haven't really understood it when you try and ask them questions later. So that's some of the challenges.
Let me respond to that. I think that's very pertinent, very pertinent. So in two ways. If we have a casual conversation with somebody at a party, somebody in the street, it's been scientifically proven that the conversation will polarize in 3.2 seconds. So it doesn't work just to have a casual conversation about the serious stuff we're talking about. In my experience of asking somebody to sit down and taking them through what I call the beer coasters model that we just saw, that's not confrontational. I say, yeah, people might not like economic growth challenged, but in those conversations, I don't have to challenge it. All I have to do is lay it out and show the connections, and they buy it or get it or not. Now, I'm guessing that to some degree, if a lot more of these conversations occurred, just as you commented, people would only partly get it. It takes time for the brain to assimilate new ideas, develop new neurological connections. But we have to start. So I choose to start.
And it's
Can I
great
make
that
a
you have.
suggestion? Sorry, Petra.
That's all right.
Something that you said, Petra, and also following on from what Andrew said, I have lots of conversations with lots of people about lots of challenging things, all of which have been mentioned today. But I find the least threatening and the most engaging method is to ask directed questions. So you can say to somebody, do you think our economy can grow forever on a finite planet?
Oh, lovely.
So you're not
That's
you're not
fun.
directing them,
That's fun.
you're not hitting them, you're not criticizing them. You're asking a question. And one of the nice things about the way the brain works, if you're lecturing or talking to somebody, people can switch off. It doesn't involve or invite interaction with the whole brain. But if you ask a question, even if it's a rhetorical question, they engage because they're expected to answer. They engage because they're not being threatened by a fact or a challenge. So you get a level of communication with that person which opens up the doors that otherwise would be shut. And there's many questions like that. The same technique you can say about population and pollution and so on. Externalized costs versus internalized costs. There's a whole lot of things you can do by really crafting your questions. And the answer that they give, you can then respond with another layer of questions. So you can actually guide people to the direction you want them to go without lecturing, or without using big words, but getting them to think about it because of the question technique. So just an idea for you all to consider.
I like that idea very much
Hi.
myself.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. My name's Stephanie Ho. I'm based in Sydney. Thank you so much for hosting this very interesting and I guess it's quite feverish for us. But I just wanted to add a few, I suppose, comments to hopefully add to the conversation to Petra's point before about just letting it be more accessible for the general public. I work for a large corporate firm, and I'm a part of the, I suppose, the team that runs campaigns. And luckily, I do a lot of work in the climate space. And it turns out that aside from people not wanting to be as engaged in the conversation, it's not just because they find it very politically charged and therefore very emotionally charged and too shy to contribute. I've found through multiple surveys and also just general observation that people don't feel well informed enough to add into this conversation. And I guess what I've found to be helpful is letting them just have resources that are very simplified, very engaging. Sometimes it's a matter of making it more accessible in terms of whether if it's more fun. So if we gamify that, and just letting them kind of absorb that in their own way and own time, and that in time has just, I've seen a much bigger engagement factor. So another one thing that I've noticed is we made this thing called a carbon calculator. So to, I guess, Andrew's point at the very beginning, people don't really see this as their problem until you ask that more pointing question of, well, what are you doing? What kind of carbon footprint are you emitting? And through those questions, do they have that aha kind of light bulb moment of, oh, I see. So because I do all these wonderful things that make me feel good, the fact that I fly twice a year around the world negates all of that kind of thing. That educational sense has really proven helpful. So that's something to add.
Stephanie, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Can you imagine a way, starting with let's say the climate calculator. Uh,
Mm.
how can you imagine a way to bridge from that to helping people get a sense of the big system that I talk about, or not?
Yeah, that's a good point. I have to admit that's another thing that, as you said, as a wicked problem. Once I have the people's attention, that's the hard part. It's just really maneuvering and transitioning that understanding to the next thing. So open for any suggestions, really.
Oh, well, my suggestion I already made.
Mm.
Once we have an open conversation where we connect with folks and bring some life into the conversation in the ways you're talking about, and then we say, would you be willing to look at this model? Sure, what's the
Yeah,
model?
yeah, that's
But
right.
very simple, very simple.
So long as the model, and someone said something about soft skills. I know it is, but I suppose to make this whole thing work for us in the future, we just need mass people to get on board. So the model that I see, albeit a bit small on my phone, I guess we just need to translate it in a way of, well, what are this bubble, this particular area means for me. So if it's about economics, it could be jobs, it could be accessible housing or anything like that. So make it more tangibly, I guess, individually poignant for them.
Yeah, I'll explain. I want to explain why I'm a bit insistent about having a bigger map. I had a quick conversation with Peter Garrett when he was a Labour politician. I met him at a fair in Randwick, and his comment was very brief, very short. He said, "Andrew, we politicians can't get too far ahead of the people." Now, I think everybody in this call knows that we really are in serious trouble, so to speak. We need massive change fast. We also know that the general public doesn't know that. I think that inclinations, I think there's a lot of unconscious worry, so my thought that is, we're actually to change the system, we have to mobilize public will to actually want to do that, whatever it takes. And the model I'm proposing for activating public will is, again, let's get the members of groups one-on-one to ask somebody they know to have one of these conversations. It's structured to the point, use their own entry point, but do something to bring it to the big picture map. In order that we mobilize thoughtful public will to actually slow the economy, take care of people, and evolve some kind of future that's going to work for the coming generations.
I want to give other people a chance to
Sure.
say something, but you give me a few ideas actually. I'd love the idea of the kitchen table because it's safe, it's also casual, and also allows you to ask those in inverted commas, the dumb questions. But if we were able to not televise, but make it invite everyone else in, and turn off their microphones and cameras, hopefully they'll see that as an example of what a good conversation could be like, and just how ask those questions. Yeah.
Cool. By the way, before we continue the conversation, I'd appreciate it if anybody who wanted to be in the loop downstream would put your contact details in the chat box. I will copy it out at the end. And I'd love to have you all. Why am I doing this? I want everybody to be a colleague. So we have great work together. But the conversation now has reached kind of an open conversation space. So let's keep going. Other comments, reactions, ideas?
Hi everyone. Andrew.
Yep.
Can
Hi,
I
Nick.
can I step in? So my name is Mick. I live in Geelong, like Petra, and I've been in the climate movement, if we call it that, for the last 8 years or so. I came from Denmark to Australia in 2013 and started, soon after I arrived in Geelong, I started a little radio show we call the Sustainable Hour, and we have been doing 350 hours of radio by now. And that has been quite a journey for me. I've talked with probably more than 1,000 people in the radio show and learned a lot. So that's the background on which I speak now. And,
great. Go on.
And also, Andrew, we've been talking together before, and you've also presented me to your ideas before, and I feel you're onto something that's very true. But I wanted to contribute with maybe some observations of where I feel we stand now, and that's set in a perspective of the last 8 years of frustration and despair sometimes about nothing happening, everything going the wrong direction, etc. I don't think I have experienced in those 8 years a more exciting time than where we are right now. We've seen over the last year, maybe it was kicked off with the bushfires here in Australia. We've seen poll after poll after poll telling us that even though it doesn't look that way when we look in the street or in the supermarket, but 80 to 90% of Australians are with us. We're not these lonely freaks out on the fringe. 80 to 90% of Australians understand we are in a climate emergency. Everybody's ready. You know, you talked about what we were saying before. You know, people actually have come to that point. I think the public will, that's what you talked about. The public will is there. Everyone is just waiting for somebody to step up and say, we have a plan.
I would
this is what you need to do. And that's what you're doing in a way, but in a modest way. I think, and I'll contribute there with my own.
Can I come in for a moment?
Yeah.
I think the public will is what I would call halfway there. And the second half is really important. Yes, polls show that lots of people, like you're saying, really feel climate change. Psychologists talk about clients anxious about it. Kids cry themselves to sleep about it, some of them. Terrible stuff, but really the psyche.
Last week, a survey last week said that 20% of the youth suffer from anxiety.
Yeah.
20%.
But the thing is, I want to tell a story, go roundabout to the point.
So my idea is that, Andrew, I don't think that there will be one single idea. There will not be one single group. There will not be one single campaign that makes it happen. There's not going to be this plan that everybody's waiting for. But what we can do is that we can come up with some things we can agree on, everyone. And I'll just give you one example of that. If we say that the climate movement here in Australia represents maybe, and I'm just thinking of the numbers of all these NGOs that I know, we're probably more than 1 million people in Australia who where you would say, if you asked those members of this and that group, they would say, yep, I'm a climate person. Yes, I'm part of the climate movement. If we are 1 million people in this country, that's 4 or 5% of the population. If 4 or 5% of all voters could agree on one single thing, not who we will vote for, not like we have to say, oh, we're going to vote for that person or this or that. But if we could all agree that we're not going to vote for the two big parties, we'll vote for small climate action parties, we'll vote for independent people who have integrity. Or, even better, we'll run ourselves. If we could all agree on that and support each other in that we are going to change the politics in this country. We're 1 million people strong, and that's all we need to do. We don't have to vote the same vote. We don't have to agree on anything else, that we are not voting on the two big parties. And we get 2 or 3 of our friends or family to do the same. We would shatter politics. We would change how politics work in the country because we had the story. We would grab the story of that election.
Okay,
so that's just an idea. And no, but this is just
Let me respond to it. Let's have a conversation, not just you.
Okay.
So Okay, so
But yeah, I'm not finished though.
it's okay. We'll still have a conversation.
All right.
And it's going to be a challenging one. Any politician we are likely to elect, unless it's somebody as astute as Scott Lublin, he's a real exception. But most people in the climate change movement who might run as politicians do not actually understand what it will take to solve climate change. And that's harsh, but I think that's realistic. They don't understand any return on energy investment, and therefore the illusion that renewable energy will power the society we now have. Not only do they not understand it, the general public is massively away from that because it's not even in the conversation. People have at every level inadequate maps, which is why I'm putting this on tonight, just to get that idea of let's have a more comprehensive mental map begin to emerge in people's thinking. So what do you think of that? Nick?
Was it a question to me or to the
Yeah,
group?
no, to you. It's okay.
I think we should hear someone else. There was a few things I couldn't hear. There was a little bit of a bad connection. Peter,
Can't
do you want to say
hear.
something?
I just said, Andrew, I can't hear you.
My mic dropped out. It does that. It wants to tease me. So I'm really serious about this, just as you're passionate, and it's great to see the passion. So Greta Thunberg and the Dalai Lama just did a famous, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. They did an interview, very friendly interview, you know, the older generation talking with younger, and good. But they didn't talk about a movement. They didn't talk about whole system change. Greta does get the economic connection, so that's good. But we need more than just these pieces of the conversation. We need our leaders and their followers and citizens to have an integrated, crude map of what needs to change to have a hopeful future.
Can I reply to that?
Sure.
I don't think any of the leaders that you see on the stage at the moment will do that ever. I think the only chance we have is to get real about what's going on and begin to push from inside and from bottom up and get some new people up on the stage.
I'm with you on
That's
that.
our job.
That's our job. Yay, yay. That's it. We have to get qualified people in the decision making.
So where I'm coming from, it's just like Peter is saying. I think simplicity is great. We need to talk very simple. But first of all, we need to give people courage. We need to give them confidence that someone has, if not a plan, then at least some numbers that shows how we're going to do this.
So, Mick, let me ask you another question since you're still here. I've suggested that we need to change people's maps, and I showed a way to do that. What do you make of the idea that we need to actually change people's maps, expand them, make them more comprehensive, more real?
I think it's great. I think that's what's needed. Greta Thunberg, in that talk, if you, for those of you who didn't see the talk she had with Dalai Lama, which was really inspirational because they also had the IPCC scientists there. And it's on YouTube, by the way, so you can see it there. Greta Thunberg's main message at that point was to say, we need to get awareness out in the general population. If there's one thing I would ask from you, it is go out there and educate. Go out there and create awareness. That was Greta's message to Dalai Lama and to the world. That's where she's at. And I think she's right. But what I think we also can do is to be bolder and have a more confident language around that. Folks, what's going on right now, I'm sorry to say it, I'll say the word, it's a bit of a dirty word, but it is a revolution. We've had an industrial revolution, we've had a digital revolution, now we have a climate revolution. Why? Because Everything is moving at the moment. If you listen to the United Nations, the IMF, the OECD, even, all those big players in the world, even the United States have come back. So everybody is coming on board from top down, and we are coming from bottom up. The only ones who are not moving are those vested interests in the middle, or the companies that are running our government.
So what I'd like to comment is, So I've set up Inspiring Transition as a platform to support thought leaders and citizen educators in, phrase it very carefully, not only raising awareness, but with that going on to help people get the systems map to know what needs to change.
Yeah.
So Inspiring Transition is not an organization in the usual sense. We have a small team that drives it, and we want to expand. But that team, and there's no core group, and not me, does not direct what people do, because we don't have to. If we recognize the need to reach the mainstream public, alignment is sufficient, which is why I talked about a life-affirming culture as an aligning goal. But you want to say something, Nick? I can say you're hot.
Yeah, because you inspire me in that respect, that to say we have one great inspiration right now, and I know it's not a nice one, but it's called a virus. And I think the only way, you mentioned earlier the 7 billion people that we need to engage on this topic. And how are we going to do that? We can barely hope to reach 2 billion of them, those who read English, or those who are part of the Western world who have an internet, and so on. Yet, what really changes the world at a global scale is sometimes when an idea is released and it spreads like a virus. And I have been part of that, seeing that happen with the climate emergency declaration movement. We were 4 people on Skype in 2016 who launched a petition, and that has gone around the world now with 2,000 councils that have declared a climate emergency, with one group after the other that have taken up the call that we need to declare a climate emergency. And just here in December, we have now the United Nations with Antonio Guterres calling on the world's government to declare a climate emergency. Now, what was that? That was an idea that went like a virus all around the planet. Why? Because nobody had ownership on it. It was just an idea. And I think that's the power in what you're saying there too. If it's presented as that it's an idea that can spread and be copied anywhere, then people will, that's great. Where can I pick up more about that? And then, then it runs.
Let's hope.
I think it has to be thought that way.
Let's hope we become an overnight success then.
Can I add to that, please, Andrew? Thanks for that, Mick. Just the thing that, as Mick said, it was one idea and it went round, and everyone had their own either idea around that or what they thought about that. But sometimes with having one particular idea and sharing that, if you can make it specific to the person rather than a specific thing that's presented, then I find, and maybe I'm just talking from a feminine perspective, but sometimes the ideas out there don't relate to me or don't relate to the way I think, and it just goes straight over my head. So sometimes just allowing that own personal growth, and I've seen a lot of that, and Mick with his show, and I have to say I was listening to the last one, just to hear the growth of people and the conversation and the change, and even the change in words. I often used to say, don't say climate change, because the climate change and people are going to tune off, but just having that climate emergency, just that one word can make a difference to have more impact everywhere else. And that's something I've been saying for a long, long time. You have to change the conversation, but you can't have the same conversation for everyone. And that's that whole uniqueness principle. And I've had conversations with neighbours and stuff like that. And I remember my next door neighbour, when I was saying it, he was into the transition towns. And then I said something, and he said, well, don't spoil my fun. I want to change my car every 5 years. So then I went on with a further conversation for something else. So we're still having a conversation. But again, it was individuals, unique. It wasn't a specific thing. So you have to personalize it to that person and form the conversation around that. So sometimes it's good to have a format to start from, but then, yeah. So that was
I think
just
we're agreed on a
something.
couple of things here. We're agreed on the value of meeting people, quote, where they are, making a connection, if possible, finding some pertinence. There are various ways to do that. And we're also agreed about the need, I think, to have a movement that becomes massive.
Yeah.
So does somebody else want to make some comments that hasn't talked yet?
I'd like to ask about how.
Francie, you've talked already. Sorry.
All right, fair enough.
Facilitator's rule. Bring in the new people.
Yeah, Greg Campbell,
Hi, Greg.
convener of Society for Responsible Design. I think everyone's adding some good comments to the conversation, and thank you for the presentation, Andrew. We've talked about this over many years. I think there's a lot of good things that you're bringing to the kitchen table, and it has been a bit disappointing that more haven't taken it up as quickly as we need to yet. But I see that in a lot of areas, from architecture to energy to people's buying habits, are particularly changing and in the process of change. And I think the messages are getting out there. And Mick, I actually heard your podcast this morning with 350.org and Dr. Wilkinson, I think. Yeah, Giselle. Yeah. Talking about the Sustainable Living Festival, and all of that. I've been to that several times myself over the years from Sydney. That's a pretty good effort. I've been to 4, but I think the voices are increasing. I think we all have to keep at it. There's multiple issues, multiple problems. It's not just the climate. We can't get by without the animals, which you did have one illustration for that, Andrew. And the environment is wrapped up in that. But the positive change, the responsible design thinking, all of these things together need to have more presence and currency and conversation. And I think we are getting there, but yes, it is too slow at the moment. But thank you all for participating in it. And I did put a survey link there. You're welcome to complete that. Andrew's already sent some good feedback on that.
Right. So my message to all of you is, I would love to have each of you become a colleague if you're so moved, and that can be an offline conversation later. We're scheduled for an hour and a half, so on that framework, we have a bit of time left. I'd like to bring in another dimension to it, just to stretch your brains a little bit more. Part of my background is I happen to be a psychotherapist. And as a psychotherapist, I'm really interested in getting real shifts in people's emotional life. So part of the new paradigm is what I call inner work, giving people tools to resolve their own emotional triggers. Happens that I wrote a book about that called Inner Work. It starts first chapter, or first, all my books are manuals, so the first exercise, if you will, introduces people to the concept of the witness. The witness is that part of our psyche that can observe exactly what we do without judgment. And I like to joke it's right next door to the critic that sees the same thing sometimes and gives it a hard time. Then goes on to present a number of really rapid techniques people can use for themselves to resolve emotional triggers. One is called Emotional Freedom Techniques, EFT. It's based on tapping on acupressure points. I'm not going to do the training now, but another one is the St. Francis process, using imagery to meet a problematic part of yourself. Oh, there's something going on. I don't know what it is. I'm disturbed, a little anxious. I want to meet the part of me that carries that anxiety. And when you do that, shifts happen. A more sophisticated version is called internal family systems, which regards the psyche, all of our psyches are being made up of different parts. Some young, some mature, some traumatized, some protective, some creative, playful, imaginative. Different parts come into play just through the rhythm of the day. That part really interests me because in changes about system change, sometimes people's irrational part comes in ways they're not aware of. Doing some research on that, and in time we'll probably write something about it. But the point is, there's a notion, just as I talk about citizen educators, we can also imagine people who have done some kind of deep inner work, deep meditation, psychotherapy, even as psychotherapists, whatever, acting as evolutionary catalysts by introducing people to these techniques that they can use for themselves. And if they do that, they're not acting as psychotherapists, they're acting as trainers, which is pretty straightforward to do. You could almost read the instructions out. It needs a bit more than that. You need to be confident in it, but it's relatively straightforward. Evolutionary catalysts, if they're in positions of influence, can change the dynamics of a business or a school to reduce bullying and create the circumstances where people listen better, foster better, don't badmouth each other, take on more responsibility. So that's part of this set of new ideas that I'm calling the new paradigm. Putting this in a larger context, a historian named Lloyd de Mouse he doubted the common belief that mothers always love their children. Cynical guy, huh? How do you know? So he went back and he said, I reviewed all the written literature, written records about child rearing from Greco-Roman times to the present, asking what was the quality of care kids would have had. And the answer was, it was awful, like really awful. But progressively, for unknown reasons, it's gradually gotten better. It used to be in the 1800s that kids were routinely beaten. You may recall the Dead Poets Society. That was what he would call socializing. Kids are controlled emotionally, not by beating. But then there's a level of child rearing that he called helping mode. And I see parents that I know, and I see how they relate to the kids. They say, oh, it looks like they're just kind of bringing their kids along. They're not trying to dominate them or mold them in a particular way. Hey, what do you want to do? I'll help you do it, kind of a thing. With the appropriate discipline as a parent. I mean, children need adult leadership. So my take on that is that we're in a long evolutionary trend that's positive. So helping mode relating is showing up as the large cohort of what are called cultural creatives. And actually, it's not just 5 or 10% of the population, it's probably closer to 30%. Going back to that comment, I think it was Mick, if we could reach them and bring them in somehow, what a really powerful force for consciousness change and for political change, properly oriented. So what do you think of this idea of, oh, we're evolutionary trends going on and we want to accelerate them?
Yeah, I mean, in the absence of, and I've already had a bit of a spiel. I absolutely agree, right? And how do we accelerate them, to bridge or bind or create the connection between all those other networks, all those other initiatives out there that are trying to achieve that, the school strike for Fridays, Extinction Rebellion, the 99% or the 1%, whatever that was, the Occupy movement, these ground up movements. How do we connect those to, they're all people after the similar sort of thing.
Exactly. So here's the idea I'm pushing. Not to connect them directly, because if there are a million groups, that would be logistically impossible. But what if we could reach out to them and get the groups to align towards the common goal of education for a life-affirming culture? Much simpler. Not easy, though, but much simpler.
Andrew, let me jump in here a moment.
Sure.
I see what you've just been talking about as an important framing device for the conversation.
Yep.
So much of our conversation about the climate emergency is, so to speak, reactive. We have a system which is doing this, destroying the planet. We need to restrain it, back and so forth. The cynical or the resigned attitude towards all that is, oh my goodness, it's a system that's out of control. What can we do? It induces a feeling of powerlessness. So the significance I see for what you just presented is as a framing device in which the new society that we need to move towards is seen not just as a reaction against what's terrible that's going on now, but as part of a larger narrative of progress, of a more humane, a more life-affirming society. It's a framing device that puts the current terrible situation as something which we will get past. We have a larger narrative of progress towards a healthier and more humane society. The apparent power of the current world system is like the apparent power of the Soviet bloc in 1989, something which will pass and crumble.
With astonishing rapidity when the penny drops.
Here.
Well, I'm wondering if this is an appropriate time to bring it to a close. Is there anything hot somebody wants to bring up, since we are still here? Where are we at in terms of what we're doing? If nobody has something they really want to raise and bring into the group, then...
Can I just support what Stephen Teller there was saying? So well formulated, and I truly believe you're right. I'm following a lot of news groups and a lot what's going on in the, not just in the climate movement, obviously, but also at the highest level. Like we just saw the UN security meeting happening in the middle of the night here in Australia, but yet that was an outstanding range of speakers talking about being responsible and taking real action with laws and legislation and governments behind it on what we're talking about here. And the next thing that comes with that is that if we contribute with that positivity you talked about, Stephen, there, we can actually make all that beauty that could lie at the other side of, at the end of this dark tunnel, or whatever picture we want to use. We could make all that happen, because it is maybe once in a lifetime chance to shake the system and say we can do better, and do better at a very, very deep and fundamental level, where we ask big questions about our existence, why we are here, what's the meaning of life, and many other questions that needs to be sort of revised or checked once more. And I think there's so much good waiting for us. We just have to open the bag.
A once in a lifetime chance. Yes, well put. Okay, I think we'll bring it to a close, and I want to say I appreciate you all coming and the vigorous conversation and thinking. And we have great work to do, so going forward, let's get on with it. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Good on, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Andrew. Nick, I really enjoyed listening to you. Thank you. In fact, everyone too.
More coming.
Good.
Ja, Mick, det er mærkeligt. Tak.
I'll have to dig out those podcasts. And Petra, I think
I put a link in the
maybe.
chat. I put a link in the chat. I would really love it if you'd listen to my Revolution podcast. I felt a little bit. It was like I was doing something that I have never done before. Let's put it that way.
Okay, Andrew, can you not close the session until I get a chance to?
Yeah, good point. I'm doing that myself. By the way, everybody, I put at the top of the chat box my contact details, also links to a number of articles and even the books you can download for free. Plus, the kitchen table conversations are available as pre-made kits. They're, again, labels.
Just Andrew, for those of us who came in late, we don't see anything from before we entered. So maybe if you could repost it.
Yeah, I'll do that. Let me first copy this off.
Well, thanks a lot, everyone. It's really good conversation. Really appreciate it. Well done.
Okay.
Thanks, Peter.
I'll be a moment more. I'm just finding it here. Here we go. Okay, in a moment I'll put it in the chat
That
box.
link from you, Nick.
And if anybody hasn't put their contact details in, I would like to have them just to put you on the mailing list, keep you in the loop. The more the merrier. Okay, I just put all those details, quite a lot of them, in the chat box.
Have you pressed enter? Because I'm not seeing it.
No, me either.
No, it's there. I did press enter.
No, it's
Oh,
showing up.
sorry. Accident. It went to Stephen Taylor alone, direct message.
Ah, there you go.
Be more generous. There we go. Glad you
Did
caught
Terry
that.
join this call from the United States?
What, Greg?
Did Terry join this call from the U.S.? It says Oregon, USA.
I don't know. I haven't tracked everybody. Joyce Arthur came on in the middle of the night.
He's half asleep. God.
What time is it over there, Greg?
Just getting on to 3.
You're dedicated. Thank you.
We do many calls with my friends in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and a guy joins us every night from Hong Kong, and it was a weekly call, so he was showing up every night at 2 a.m. till his decision was whether to continue to talk to people or go back to bed, and invariably he was the last one on the call. So
nice.
So I'll be seeing Andrew tomorrow morning his time.
Yep, looking forward to that.
After, yeah. So.
Okay, have
where
you
are
all
you
copied the stuff from the chat box?
I have not. I'm not even sure how to do that, but
You probably already have a lot of it, Greg, but have a go, learn how to do it. I'm not in a hurry.
Mick, I haven't seen your link to the podcast yet.
It's further up.
Oh,
How is
damn.
it?
Yeah, I can. If you scroll up, I think I put it just after I had said my first. I'm happy to put. Happy to put it again. What just quickly. Or maybe did I make the same mistake?
Oh, God.
Maybe. Just you could tell me maybe.
It's a little longer than that. No, I did post it to everyone, but here, I'm posting just the link here. There.
Ah, got it.
I hope it works, actually. I wrote it by hand.
HTTPS climatesafety.info.
Yep. Climate revolution, and then the number 1, because I'm hoping to make number 2, 3, and 4.
Planning ahead, that's good. I think what would be a good idea is to put in 001 so that you can go to 1,000.
Yes, I did think about that, but I thought that was too ambitious a signal.
So, Stephanie, I thought that you and I might have a future conversation. I was intrigued.
Tell him.
Okay, I think it's probably all the homework is done. You've got the links. Again, thanks everybody for being here. Greg, we'll talk tomorrow.
Bye, Andrew. Bye, Stephanie.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye, Greg.